If our fathers and models were God, and our fathers failed us, what does this tell us about God? That He doesn't like you. In all probability, He hates you. This is not the worst thing. It's not? No, we don't need Him. That's a hit line from the movie Fight Club, in which Ed Norton and Brad Pitt played essentially the same character in Brad Jordan. This movie was released in 2001, and Fight Club became an alpha which would predict what would happen over the course of the next decade. Blackie Sherrod, the famous sports writer from the Chicago Tribune, stated, "The reason history must repeat itself is because we pay so little attention to it the first time." And in the Book of Solomon we read, "The thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which shall be is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been of old time which was before us." Now, Fanny Bryce said, "Let the world know you as you are, not as you think you should be." Now, Solomon was talking about the circular nature of time, and Fanny Bryce was talking about being authentic and real, which are How many of you have read this book published in 1991 by Strauss and Howe titled Generations? At least two of you in the room, which is good. Strauss and Howe were sociology professors at MIT, and they wanted to see if there was a pattern in the way that society changes its mindset from one ideology to another. And so what they did is they went out and researched the last 400 years of recorded Western civilization. And what they found was that there are these four 20-year generational patterns: a civic, adaptive, idealistic, and reactive cycles. Now, this presentation was initially developed by my co-author and mentor, Roy H. Williams. And he's a strong evangelical Christian. This was actually developed back in 2003. And he said, you know what, I agree with what the book is saying. There must be a pattern to the way society changes its mindset. But it can't be four 20-year generational patterns. Rather, it should be two 40-year generational patterns. Why? Because in the Old Testament alone, there are more than 60 mentions of 40-year generational patterns. How many of you know the story of Moses? Okay, so about 2/3 of the room, which is great. How old was Moses when he was kicked out of Egypt? 40. He was 40. And what was he kicked out of Egypt for doing? For killing an Egyptian slave master who killed a Hebrew slave. He was the prince of Egypt. He acted like the prince of Egypt. He did what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. How old was he when he returned to Egypt? 80. He was 80. And what did he return to do? To free the slaves, to free the people. He left Egypt as a strong individualist about himself, and he returned as a community leader, community organizer. And to punish the Israelites for worshiping a false little calf, how long did the Israelites have to wander around the wilderness?
40 years.
40 years. So to Roy, it couldn't be four 20-year generational patterns. Rather, it had to be two 40-year generational patterns. And about 2/3 of the way through this giant novel, or book, Generations, Strauss and Howe admitted that there are two dominant and two recessive cycles. The civic and idealistic cycles are the dominant cycles, and the adaptive and reactive cycles are the recessive cycles. So in essence, they were in agreement. There were two 40-year generational patterns. Now, I come from the book publishing industry, and I find that when there's a problem in communication, it's based upon a lack of shared definition. So let me define for you what I mean when I say the word generation. If you define a generation as someone born between this year and that year, that won't work. Rather, a generation is the predominant worldview of society as a whole. It's the lens through which we make our decisions and how we value each other. It's the carrot at the end of the stick that we chase, and it changes 40 years. Every 40 years. We don't necessarily know what the carrot will be, but we absolutely know that it'll be brought to us by the youth. So the reason we call this pendulum is it describes the action of how society changes its mindset. A pendulum will start off at point zero. It'll swing up to its zenith, to its height. Gravity will pull it down. The gravity will create the momentum up into the other cycle, and back and forth, and back and forth. Back in October of last year, Roy and I published our book titled Pendulum, based on this presentation. And what we did is we went back and researched not the last 400 years of recorded civilization, but rather the last 3,000 years. And what we found is that human beings are incredibly predictable. We are not the unique snowflakes that we would like to be, pretend to be. Now, we start, and we also change our definitions from idealistic and civic to me versus we to simplify the idea. So throughout this presentation, we're going to be referring to a 40-year me generation and a 40-year we generation. And we start every cycle of the pendulum cycle in a we cycle. In a we cycle, it's not about big dreams, it's about small actions. It's not about going to the moon, rather it's about going across the street and giving that poor homeless guy something to eat. But as is human nature, by the height, the zenith of a we cycle, we will always take a good thing too far. And our society will become a society that is highly regimented and highly conformed. And it'll be the youth of society that become the gravity that pulls us back down the other way. 30 years into every cycle, 10 years before the tipping point, we will always see alphas emerge in literature and technology. How many of you know what the term alpha means? About a third of the room, more than half the room. So an alpha is someone who is a predictor. They come before something goes mainstream. So we look for alphas in literature and technology to predict what it's going to be like, in this case, in the upcoming me generation. 35 years into every cycle, 5 years before the tipping point, we will always see alphas emerge in music, again predicting what it's going to be like in the next me cycle, and then we'll complete a full 40-year we generation. Now, the gravity that pulled us down becomes the momentum that pulls us up into a me cycle. In a me cycle, it's about looking and feeling good today. It's about freedom and self-expression. But again, as human beings, we always take a good thing too far, and by the zenith, the height of a me cycle, we become a society that is plastic, that is phony. Essentially, we become a society of posers. And again, the youth of society become the gravity that pulls us back down the other way. 30 years into every cycle, 10 years before the tipping point, we will always see alphas emerge in literature and technology. Again, predicting what it's going to be like in the next, in this case, we generation. 35 years into the cycle, 5 years before the tipping point, we will always see alphas emerge in music, and then we'll complete a full 40-year me generation. Now, according to the research that Roy and I did for the book, Pendulum, once we hit year zero, the tipping point in either direction, it takes about 6 years for society as a whole to adopt that new mindset. Why? Because whereas the youth represented the alphas in society, once they hit the tipping point, it takes a full 6 years for their parents and their grandparents as the majority to adopt that new mindset. Now, what I'm going to show you in the course of the next 50 minutes or so is the last completed we cycle from 1923 to 1963, and we're going to illustrate what it's like in a we generation. We're going to show you politics and music and movies to illustrate what it's like in a we generation. Then we're going to take you from 1963 to 2003, again, using politics and music and books and other things to illustrate what it's like in a me generation. We're going to bring it to 2003, bring us out to 2015, and predict what's going to happen in the completion of this we generation and what this means for your business. So we're going to start in 1923. This is the music of the we generation. Now come along for a better day. The lyrics are G, but I think we're going to see that all game of mine. In 1933, we see the birth of the Salvation Army. How many of you know the backstory of the Salvation Army? Well, at least a few of you. In 1923, the women of the Salvation Army wanted to give back to the members of the military serving overseas. So what did? They made donuts. And they mailed those donuts to the members of the military serving overseas, and they were known as the Donut Dollies. This one small civic action of giving back is what launched the Salvation Army into the internationally recognized organization that it is today. In 1933, in the United States, we also see a crackdown on alcohol and tobacco with prohibition, and of course a crackdown on organized crime. Why? Because in a we generation, it's about doing what's best for society as a whole. Alcohol and tobacco create criminality and addiction and other problems, so of course we have to outlaw those. And in 1933, we also hear FDR say,
"My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the..."
Now, I wish we had politicians as honest and candid today as we did with FDR in 1933. The reason I play FDR's Fireside Chats is that they sit at the pantheon as the most well-listened to radio show in the history of mankind. The population in North America in 1933 was 1/3 smaller than it is today. Yet more people listen to FDR's Fireside Chats than any other radio show. Why? Because FDR was our national family patriarch, our national father, who was addressing a national family crisis, the Great Depression. He was getting us to sit down in the living room to address this problem, just like each of us would do when addressing our own family problems. Now, by 1943, we are now 20 years into the last completed we generation. We have become a society that is highly regimented and highly conformed. And this image is of Bob Hope. Now, I couldn't find a better image of it, but normally when Bob Hope would entertain the troops serving overseas, he would wear army fatigues. Why? Because he wanted to fit in. He wasn't better or worse than the members of the military serving overseas. He was simply doing his part. So when he got off stage, he simply wanted to disappear into the group. Now, what's interesting about every major regeneration is that we're always faced with some major external issue, say World War II, or the current war on terror, or some major internal issue like the Great Depression, or the current recession that we're in today. It'll be interesting when we look back 40 and 60 years from now what our primary focus becomes. So then we hit 1953. This is 30 years into the last we cycle. This is 10 years before the tipping point. We should see an alpha emerge in literature and technology. Right on cue, we see the release of A Catcher on the Rye by J.D. Salinger. How many read this book in high school or college? Who was Holden Caulfield?
The average guy.
It was the main character in the book. And what did he do? He rejected his parents, his family, his school, his society, his government. He was rejecting the regimentation and conformity that existed in 1953 America. And the youth of society in 1953 America was so ready for the message of A Catcher in the Rye that they bought more than 26 million copies. Now, the book released in 1953 was a little book by Jack Kerouac titled On the Road. It was a largely autobiographical book about Jack Kerouac's drug-induced adventures through middle century America. He's credited as the father of the beatnik generation, and most major musicians of the 60s and 70s attribute their success to, and the music they wrote, to Jack Kerouac. Again, he was a rebel who was breaking away from the bounds of regimentation and conformity that existed in 1953 America. And the youth of society was so ready for this message that the youth of society bought more than 29 million copies of the book. Now, I personally placed 75 consecutive books on the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and New York Times bestsellers list. And I don't believe collectively that I've sold 29 million copies. Yet, this message so resonated, this message of breaking away from regimentation conformity, so resonated with the youth that it sold 29 million copies. In 1953, we also see the release of the first convertible, the steam brake Corvette. Now, in a we generation, it's about use and utility. The only vehicle made by Ford during World War II was the Jeep for the U.S. war effort. Why? Because that was what was needed in society. In a we generation, we want a car that has 2 rows of seats, 2 sets of doors, so that we can properly utilize that vehicle. But as an alpha to a me generation, it's not about use and utility, oh no. It's about looking and feeling good today. So I don't need 2 rows of seats, I just need 1. And I certainly don't need a top, because I just want to roll down the street with this hot chick sitting next to me, bragging to all my friends about how cool I am. Again, it was an alpha, predictive of what would happen in the upcoming new generation. Also released in 1955 was James Dean's critically acclaimed movie, A Rebel Without a Cause. The American Movie Association says that this was the most critical movie made in the 1950s. James Dean was essentially Jack Kerouac. He was Holden Caulfield. He was literally a rebel without a cause. Here's an ad from 1957. Now, this advertiser is truly a brilliant advertiser. They're trying to appeal to both the adults of society and the youth of society. The gentleman wearing the suit and tie represents the adults in society. And this gentleman who's jumping out of the airplane literally represents the youth of society, breaking away from the bounds of regimentation and conformity that existed in 1950s America. For those of you under the age of 45, and let me stress, under the age of 45, what product are they selling?
Target.
In the dull and commonplace occurrences of day-to-day living, one thing stands out as a completely unique experience. Colt 45 malt liquor.
I don't like beer, I don't drink beer, but I understand that Colt 45 is a pretty ghetto beer. So then we hit 1958, 5 years before the tipping point. We should see an alpha emerge in music. Chuck Berry was the real innovator of rock and roll, but our society in 1958 America was too racist to allow a black man to be the purveyor of this type of music. So we had to find a white man to sing a black man's music, and of course we found him in Tupelo, Mississippi, named Elvis Presley. Now, in a Wii cycle, it's not about big dreams, it's about small action. It's not about going to the moon, it's about going across the street and getting enough homeless guy something to eat. But in 1961, JFK became an alpha when he said,
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
And then we hit beginning of the last Wii cycle. And right on cue, in either direction, it takes about 6 years for society as a whole to adopt a new mindset. So in 1963 America, the old mentality of representation and conformity still exists. So what are the Beatles wearing? Suits and ties. How about the music of the 1960s? Melody Rose must a man walk on before they call him a man. In a Wii cycle, it's about community. But in a V cycle, it is about the individual. Here are the Beatles in 1963. I couldn't find a better image of this, but they were wearing the same turtlenecks and they had the exact same haircut. Now, for 1963 America, that was considered a long haircut, but it was at least the same haircut. But within 4 short years, by 1967, everything changes. In the 1960s, we see the Beatles grow up. We see Bob Dylan plug in. We see Jimi Hendrix burn up the stage. And then burn out. How many of you are familiar with this book, I'm Okay, You're Okay? It sits in the pantheon as one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. It sold more than 10 million copies. And what does the book say? I'm okay, you're okay. If I'm a 5'2" white guy and believe in myself hard enough and work hard enough, by golly, I can be the next Michael Jordan, because that's what my mommy taught me to believe in a me generation. Here's an ad from 1969. And furnished in grow apple trees and honeybees and snow white shrubs. Oh, and they like to teach the world to sing. They like to find the world to cook. I have a suggestion for them. They should shut up and do it. You know, I've done these presentations for many youth groups, and you understand when I show them this ad? This ad makes me want to puke. This type of pretentious advertising would never work with today's lead generation. But honestly, in the 1960s, we believed that a song and a hit could change the world. I mean, honestly, what has Coke ever done for us? I mean, when I was 18 and I went to Van's Warped Tour and I'm hot and sweaty and I want something to drink, I'm paying $8. Or when I take my 8-year-old daughter to movie theaters, I'm paying $6. Apple trees and honeybees and Snow White loves my foot. Now, I just mentioned that I've done this presentation for many years, and even with this most recent death, they often ask me this question. So I had to add in this little slide. Now, Michael Jackson plays a critical role at the zenith, the height, in 1983 of the last Wii generation, and we'll talk about him in 1983. Here's the Grammys of 1973. This is 10 years after me reached the tipping point, and 10 years before he reaches the zenith. Now, what I want to point out is that in terms of the pendulum, 10 years out, 1973, and 10 years down, 1993, are almost exactly the same. So in theory, the music of 1973 and 1993 should sound almost exactly the same, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. but in today's we generation, it would never chart. Hey, Grant, I love you, man. I need you, man. I need you to feel good right now. Our parents teach us to believe that we can be bigger and better than who we actually are. But do we have any question why we have the problems with anorexia and bulimia that we do today? I can be a bird. I can fly anywhere. I can do whatever I want. Because that's what my mommy taught me I could do in a me generation. Now everybody stand up. Everybody up. Everybody stand up. Rick asked me not to yell at you, but we all need to yell for the wall. Everybody stand up. Alright, so I need full audience participation this one. Ready, guys? Yes. Here we go. Then we hit 1983, the zenith, the height of the last few generations. And of course, right on cue, who released his biggest album, like Michael Jackson. Listen to the lyrics of the song. Jesus, the girl, this is what I wrote. But they can't have my son, because at the height of the generation, I can't take responsibility for my own actions. Now, this album was released when I was 4, and I love listening to this song at Halloween. And you know what, my 8-year-old daughter, she likes the song too. So every king must have his queen. Whose first album was released in 1983?
Madonna?
Yeah. Because at the height of the new generation, we were what?
A material girl. Material girl. Material girl. And I am a material girl.
Because we were living in the world, and she was a material girl. How about the #1 Super Bowl ad of all time? The ad that saved our computer. From George Orwell's book, 1984, which predicted a world of high regimentation and high conformity, comes this ad.
Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And then we hit 1993. This is 10 years after me reaching the zenith, and 10 years before the tipping point, the beginning of the next we generation. Now, as I pointed out, 10 years up, 1973, and 10 years down, 1993, should sound almost exactly the same, so let's test that out. No longer do I need to be a seagull to get where I want, I can get there on a magic carpet. Compare Tony Brown with Gladys Knight and and oh yeah, there's this guy. Really? Milo? Milo's first album, Bad Out of Hell, was released in, 1973. Of course, Rock and Roll Picture Show was released in 1975, but his first rounding wasn't until 1993 with the song. Well, who else can find from the 1970s to win their first Grammy in 1993? How about Aerosmith was released in 1970. And they had loads of hits like Dream On and Katie's Got a Gun and People Like a Lady and all sorts of other big songs. But they didn't win their first Grammy until 1993. So by 1993, we're 30 years into the last me generation, 10 years before the tipping point. We should see an alpha emerge in literature and technology, and sometimes they merge together. In 1993, American Online went public, and contrary to what Al Gore says, American Online was the real purveyor or inventor of the internet. Starting in 1993, you probably all remember receiving these.
You've got mail. You've got mail. You've got mail. You've got mail.
In Strauss and Howe's second book, A Fourth Turning, they stated, around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, are you a very important person? Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves as collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. So by 1998, we're 35 years into the last cycle. We're 5 years before the tipping point. We should see an alpha emerge in music. Someone like Chuck Berry or Elvis Presley. But even as recently as just 15 years ago, our society was still too racist to allow a white man to be the purveyor of next type of music, so we had to find a white man to sing a black man's music. And we found him.
Play it again, Smith, and you're fired.
Yeah, everybody's calling you a loser.
Number one, at one point, you gotta start living up here and start living down here.
In 2003, Eminem played, for all intents and purposes, Eminem, living on the wrong side of 8 Mile. This was 40 years to the day that the Beatles played an over-the-top, unrealistic depiction of the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night.
He sees everything you ever wanted. If something's gonna happen, it needs to happen now. Did you capture it?
It's my boy Money Rabbit, he's a genius.
Just let it slip.
What are you doing with your life that's so great?
Back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes gravity. Chuck, he's so mad, but he won't. He won't have it, he knows. He won't have it, he knows. His whole back to his rope. It don't matter, he's dope. He knows that, but he's broke. He's so sad, but he knows when he goes back to this mobile home. That's when it's back to the lab again, yo. His whole back to he better go back to his moment at home and don't do it. Stop doing music the moment you own it. You better never let it go. You only get one shot. You not miss your chance to blow. Opportunity goes once in a lifetime. You better.
In 1998, Eminem said about his alter ego, Slim Shady, that he was the evil and foul mouth side of me. And since then, he's won 8 Grammys and 1 Academy Award for that song in 8 Mile. Now, I like to watch an audience's response to that video. It's interesting to see who likes it and who doesn't. Because Eminem's music is a Rosetta Stone into this we generation. And the reality is, you don't have to like the music of Eminem, just like most of your parents didn't like your rock and roll. But the reality is that Eminem gives us an insight into today's youth. So, how many of you know what the Rosetta Stone was? Oh, about 2/3 of the group. Good. For the rest of you, before its discovery in 1799 by Napoleon Bonaparte, Egyptian hieroglyphics was a dead language. On the Rosetta Stone was the same story written in 3 different languages. 2 of those languages we could read. The third was Egyptian hieroglyphics. So the Rosetta Stone opened up a world of wealth of knowledge into the Egyptian culture. So for the purpose of this presentation, how am I defining what I mean when I say this is a Rosetta Stone? It's the lens through which we can begin to understand the new rules of society, the new criteria for making judgments, and how we value each other. It's the carrot at the end of the stick that we chase, and it changes every 40 years. We don't necessarily know what that new carrot will be, but we absolutely know that it will be brought to us by the youth. We are all losing our baby boomerisms, our me worldview with every passing hour. So how will this affect how we do business in the future? And what was the message of the alphas? We want the truth, even if it's ugly. Polished, vetted, shrink-wrapped, sugar-coated, phony posing is no longer acceptable. Posted online in 1999, the Clue Train Manifesto stated, in a few more years, the pure homogenized voice of business, the sounds of mission statements and brochures will seem as contrived and artificial as the language of the 18th century French court. Getting a sense of humor does not mean putting some jokes on the corporate website. Rather, it requires big values, a little humility, straight talk, and a genuine point point of view.
Hello, I'm Mac.
And buy a PC.
What?
Well, I know you like to just hang out when we're together, but the fact is you're selling like hotcakes now, and I got to get my message out. So I'm doing a little buzz marketing for old PC, the only computer you'll ever need. If you act now,
PC, what are you doing this? This is ridiculous.
Well, look, I track these buying trends, and people seem to be falling for your whole high life thing, so I got to pull out all the stops. Supplies are limited. Hot rates standing by.
It's very subtle.
Buy it. Buy it.
Bill Burnback said, I've got a great drink. Let's tell the truth.
Show me a smile, then. Don't be unhappy, can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy and you've taken all you can bear, you call me up because you know I'll be there. And I see your true colors shining through. I see your true colors, and that's why I love you. So don't be afraid to let them show you're beautiful like a rainbow.
James Bond, the god of a new generation. Men wanted to be him, women wanted to be with him. He drove the best cars and had the best toys. How does an emerging we generation view posers like James Bond?
Yeah. Finally, those capitalist pigs will pay for their crimes, eh? Hey, comrades? Hey?
Austin, we won.
Oh, groovy, smashing. Yay, capitalism.
I'm going to place him in an easily escapable situation involving an overly elaborate and exotic death. All right, guard, begin the unnecessarily slow-moving dipping mechanism.
And then we hit 2003, year zero, the tipping point, the beginning of this we cycle. So now that we've hit that tipping point, what exactly does that mean? The last gasps of the bigger-than-life baby boomer posing are over. You guys remember this kiss? Yeah. The kiss that was supposed to pass the torch from Madonna and Britney Spears? That didn't work out for Britney Spears. Here's the Grammys for 2003. This is Norah Jones. She's almost the anti-Britney Spears. And if you remember back to the very first song that I played from 1923, and compare it to this song, you'll find that it's eerily similar. Of course, in 2003, the Dixie Chicks won their first Grammy, but their most recent Grammy was for A Return to the Roots, their musical and their political roots. It used to be that when we made a mistake, that we would just go check ourselves into rehab if we worked in the media. But in today's we generation, our currencies are authenticity and transparency. And when faced with the truth, we own it. Of course, in 2003, Eminem won both the Grammy and Academy Award for the song, as did this producer. He wrote this music for this movie about these guys that had to work together. Now, this group of guys, they're misfits. And they had to work together to save the world, and nobody thought that they could do that. Now, that movie...
It has been found.
Sauron needs only this ring to enslave the world.
It must be destroyed in fires of doom.
Strangers from distant lands, you will unite or you will fall.
You have my soul.
And you have my vote.
And mine.
This task was appointed to you, and if you do not find a way, no one will.
The Lord of the Rings, directed by Peter Jackson, rated
Now,
PG-13.
the Lord of the Rings trilogy sits at the pantheon as the best-selling fantasy series of all time for 3 books. Those 3 books still outsold any 3 Harry Potter books combined. Now, the books were written in the 1930s and 1940s. The last book, The Return of the King, was published in 1952. Yet it was never made into a major theatrical trailer until 2003. Why? Because in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we wanted stories about strong individuals, not about groups of people. And of course, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is about a group of people working together for the common good. This is our new James Bond, Jason Bourne. He's flawed in every conceivable way, and he doesn't even know who he is. And his car, I mean, it's cool, but it's certainly not James Bond's. And to save the James Bond franchise in 2006, they had to completely rewrite the character. They had to make him bleed. They had to make him cry. They had to make him real. Had they not done that, they would have destroyed the franchise. So phony is out, real is in.
This is how you turn it on. This is your music. This is your email. This is the web. And this is a call on your iPhone.
And you got one now, give yourself for free the set of Ginsu knives! In a V-cycle, that's how we hawk our products. But in a V-cycle, contrary to what we were taught in our marketing classes in college, in a V-cycle, it is no longer about the sizzle. It's about the steak. If there's one thing you can take away from me this afternoon, it's this. In today's we generation, people are not interested in sizzle. They are not interested in the way you present. What they're interested in is the meat that you're offering. So in 2005, we can all remember that Katrina hit the New Orleans area, and while President Bush was touring the area, saying his friend Chucky Browning was doing a heck of a job, Shepard Smith was on Fox News on the Sean Hannity show, and Sean Hannity was pulling the White House line, saying everything's fine, everything's great, then Shepard Smith snapped. And Shepard Smith said, you know what? It's not true. What's going on down here is terrible. It's horrible. We need help, and we need help fast. In a we generation, it doesn't matter if we're liberal or conservative. It doesn't matter if we're Republicans or Democrats. When we're faced with the truth, we speak it. In a we generation, you'll see that volunteerism is on the rise. How many of you are familiar with this organization, Generation Engage? A couple of you, okay. So, Generation Engage is a nonprofit political action committee that sends in speakers into universities around the country. And they don't just send in the normal liberal speakers like Spike Lee or Loretta Scott King, but they also send in conservative speakers like Newt Gingrich. Why? Because in a we generation, it's not about big dreams, it's about small actions. And we want the youth of society to go out and take any action. It doesn't matter what it is, we want them to go out and do something.
I am part of a lost generation, and I refuse to believe that I can change the world. I realize this may be a shock, but happiness comes from within is a lie, and money will make me happy. So in 30 years, I will tell my children they are not the most important thing in my life. My employer will know that I have my priorities straight because work is more important than family. I tell you this, once upon a time, families stayed together. But this will not be true in my era. This is a quick fix society. Experts tell me 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce. I do not concede that I will live in a country of my own makings. In the future, environmental destruction will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about this earth. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. And all of this will come true unless we choose to reverse it. There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about this earth. No longer can it be said that environmental destruction will be the norm. In the future, I will live in a country of my own making. I do not concede that 30 years from now, I will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of my divorce.
Crazy.
Experts tell me this is a quick fix society, but this will not be true in my era. Families stayed together once upon a time. I tell you this, family is more important than work. I have my priorities straight because my employer will know that they are not the most important thing in my life. So in 30 years, I will tell my children, money will make me happy is a lie, and true happiness comes from within. I realize this may be a shock, but I can change the world, and I refuse to believe that I am part of a lost generation.